Hello, and welcome to Fluff It, a podcast by furries for furries. My name is Uno, and I'm a raccoon.
And I am Felix, and I am a wolf.
Welcome back, anyone who was listening last time, who's joining us again for today's episode. And welcome to any of the new listeners who are maybe tuning in for the first time or checking out the podcast for the first time. So since last time, we've had quite a lot of nice comments, nice messages. So that's been really good. I'm always really happy to hear what people think. And it's really exciting to see how many people are tuning in from different places.
Yeah, it's been really cool. I mean, we've gotten messages from Astro and Legoshi wolves, and we really appreciate any comments and all the support you guys have been giving us. We've had new listeners come in from Utah, Alaska, and Malaysia, out of all places. So that's really cool that that our podcast is now being heard on 3 continents. And that's just really cool to I'm speechless. It's crazy is to know how many people are tuning in. So thank you so much, guys. And there are probably tons of people out there from various countries that are tuning in. Unfortunately, we can't really know where you guys are because of the YouTube statistics. So if you want to share your country with us, feel free to message us and where you're listening from. So today's episode, we are going to be talking about our favorite underrated furry media. So Una, how would we consider underrated? Because there are tons of furry media out there like Zootopia and Beastars that are extremely popular. But what are we kind of considering under the radar?
Yeah, so when we say underrated, we really just mean underrated. So for example, like as a kid, I was a huge Sonic fan. So I would say like Sonic is one of the things that made me a furry, but at the same time, Sonic is like super well known in the same way possibly that things like some of the sort of main Disney films like The Lion King and newer films like Zootopia, Beastars, things like that. Those are the kind of well-known sort of furry media that most furries either like or just know about or could have become a furry because of those as a kid or anything of the sort. But when we say underrated, we really just mean the kind of unusual ones that perhaps not as many people have heard of. I'm sure out of everyone who's listening, people will have heard of some of these. Some are more underrated than others. Some of the topics that we're covering today I hadn't even heard of until a few nights ago. So
same here.
So yeah, it should be really interesting, and hopefully some of the listeners will have something new to check out at the end. So that would be really cool. So Felix, do you want to start off with your first choice?
Sure, I will go ahead and start. So the first one I am going to be mentioning is a book. So the book is called Wolves of Beyond. It is, I believe, 6 books long, maybe 7. And it is done by Catherine Lasky, who also wrote the Guardians of Ga'Hoole, which is kind of like a warrior cat series, but it's owls, to my knowledge. So Wolves of Beyond is very much in that same atmosphere. I read a few of the books in my elementary and middle school days, and I really liked the series. And it follows basically this wolf from birth called Fowlin. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But basically in the first book, he is born with a disability to his leg, and the wolf pack basically wants to kill him. And basically he gets rescued by Despair, who adopts him, and Fowlin throughout the books returns to this pack and starts to become a leader. It's kind of a good old-fashioned rise to the top type from the bottom stories. And I think anyone who likes feral furry media will really like these books, especially if you grew up really liking Warrior Cats, Guardians of Ga'Hoole, and other feral type furry content.
Yeah, so I had never heard of Wolves of... sorry, I can't even say the word now. I had never heard of that series until you mentioned it the other night, actually. But as a kid, I did have a phase on Warrior Cats, as I think a lot of young furries did, or still do. So definitely that, I think as a kid, I would have loved those books. I'm kind of wish I knew about them as a kid. So yeah.
Yeah, the publisher is Scholastic. And now I got this book when I went to the book fair. I don't know how it is over there in the United Kingdom and
Yeah.
elsewhere, but in the United States, especially here in good old Georgia, shouldn't have really been doing a southern accent, but here in Georgia, the we have something called the book fairs.
Yeah, we had book fairs too.
So we had the scholastic book fairs, and they would like do trailers on like TVs of books. We would go in one day. My mom actually worked at the book fair as a volunteer, so I went to the book fair a little bit more than my peers. So I got to see a lot of the books, and one that did definitely stand out to me was Lone Wolf, which is the first book of the Wolves of Beyond. And I really need to. I haven't finished the series, I'll confess, but I really liked how it started, and I really recommend that people who like the Fee World type stuff really look into Wolves of Beyond. So hopefully, new book series to check out.
Yeah, definitely. If you're looking for something to read, then there is your recommendation.
Yeah, but that is Wolves of Beyond in a nutshell. So, Uno, what would be one of your underrated furry pieces of media you would like to share?
So one of the ones that was kind of a big one for me, because I was a kid in the early 2000s, but I grew up watching a lot of 80s cartoons because very early in the morning they'd show like random 80s cartoons, and then I got like really, really hooked on them and used to like go online and search for weird 80s cartoons, which is why I grew up with them. But one of my all-time favorites was the Biker Mice from Mars. So there were two series of this. There was a 2006 series. I think it was 2006. And there was also an 80s and 90s series, maybe late 80s, early 90s, I think. But basically, I mean, it's been a very long time since I've watched them, so I can't remember the full story, but it follows kind of the storyline of this group of like three mice who come from Mars. So technically like aliens, but they look like mice. And they're bikers, so they all ride motorbikes. And I can't really remember the entire plot, but I remember in the original 80s series, like the mice come from Mars to Earth, and they kind of befriend this like mechanic, and then they're kind of under attack from villains that have come to Earth. I can't really remember why because it has been so long, but I just remember the art style being like really, really 80s, and like it was kind of in a similar style to like Ninja Turtles and a lot of the similar 80s cartoons that featured Amphro animals. But the Biker Mice was a little bit lesser known. And I definitely think it would appeal to a lot of furries just because of the art style and the characters. Three very muscular mice. So I'm sure that appeals to a lot of people.
Yes, probably.
But I really liked it as a kid. I loved the characters. My favorite character was Throttle, who's like the boss mouse.
Boss mouse.
And it was just a really fun cartoon, and both versions. I mean, the 80s version was the best one. But the 2006 series, I mean, I was a kid when that came out, so I was really into that too. And I had all the action figures. I'm pretty sure I still have some of them somewhere. But yeah, I definitely think that was one of the things that got me into furries, because I was into the Ninja Turtles as well. So Biker Mice was sort of an extension of that because it's a very similar sort of cartoon.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
that's I never knew about it until you mentioned it the other night, and I looked it up, and oh my gosh, those mice are muscular as heck. It looks really interesting, and I mean, as someone who does look and watch old 80s cartoons, I mean, I watched the more known ones for furries like DuckTales, Tailspin, Rescue Rangers, but I've never heard about Biker Mice from Mars, and that's just such a badass name.
Yeah. It
A
was, I remember as a kid, it was just like, it just seemed incredibly cool. Like, even though it's just a kid's cartoon, but I remember like pretending to be the characters and stuff because it just seemed so much cooler than most other cartoons. Because it's like, it's mice, but they also ride motorbikes and they come from Mars.
I mean, that's just such a. I mean, it's a crazy but genius concept.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's a show I really want to now see.
Yeah.
I'm a little mad I never knew about it. So I'm just super excited that there's Biker Mice from Mars. Especially, I grew up really liking space, and I would have, and I don't know how I would react because I grew up loving animals and growing loving space as a child. So I was like, okay, that could just easily combine both
Yeah.
there. So I'm like, oh, well, better now than never. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd honestly recommend checking it out because it's just funny as well. Like it's such a bizarre concept that it works so well. So yeah, definitely check it out. And to any of the listeners who have never seen it, I would definitely recommend checking it out if you're looking for something interesting to watch. So moving on, what is your next choice?
So my next one is not exactly furry, but it does have furry elements to it. It's a graphic novel called Amulet, and I'm going to butcher the person's name, so I apologize in advance. But Amulet is done by a Japanese author and illustrator named Kazu Kibushi. I'm really sorry for butchering that, but Amulet is essentially a steampunk fantasy graphic novel series. This was another one that I was introduced to in the book fair, and this one was a lot more prevalent in the scholastic book fair. I remember my middle school had a bunch of printed out bookmarkers for the comic strips that you could like place into each of a book that you're reading. But it essentially follows this girl, I believe named Emily, and her brother, and they are basically kind of fighting against these autocratic elves that kind of look a little bit more like orcs. I really like that the elves don't look like elves from like the Tolkien Lord of the Rings. But one of the furry characters is kind of like Emily's kind of like unofficial mentor companion, and he is a fox called Leon Redbeard. He was previously a human. He got cursed into a fox, which, I mean, for a lot of furries, that would be pretty rad. But it's basically a steampunk novel, or not novel, graphic novel, graphic novel series where it's kind of like following Emily and how she's kind of like fighting against these elves. And there is parts of the books where there's like this civilization of humans that their town was like cursed, and they've all like became these anthropomorphic animals, and there's a lot of other anthropomorphic animals than Leon that play roles in these graphic novels. But if you really like furries and steampunk, I would really check it out. While the author and illustrator is Japanese, the art style is very unique. Kind of like has this Studio Ghibli type feel with like some American aspects of cartoony. Kind of like, and it's kind of like, I don't know how to describe the style. It's kind of like a blend of multiple, but I would definitely check this graphic novel out. I think it just ended. They had 9 issues, but I do believe that this is becoming a movie sometime in the near
Ooh.
future. So, like Beastars, which was used to be an anthropomorphic manga, this could potentially get huge in the furry fandom here in a few years, depending on how successful they go with making the movie. I've not heard recent updates about it.
Yeah, because I didn't think I'd heard of Amulet, but then after you mentioned it a couple of nights ago, I actually looked it up and I do recognize the art style. So I think I've probably just seen it around the comic stores or whatever, but I'm really into steampunk, so that is one that I definitely want to check out properly. And to hear that there's going to be a movie as well, I actually had no idea, so that would be cool to see.
Yeah, I think they announced the movie a few years ago, but I'm not sure where it is.
Yeah.
Just because of COVID and but no, it's really cool to see that this might become a this probably will become a movie at some point, and it's very curious to see how they go with this movie because I mean it could be very successful, but at the same time it could be a disaster at this. It kind of depends on
Yeah.
if they decide if they want to try live action or
Mm.
go more the animation style. So hopefully they stay away from the live action.
You really can go either way, I think,
Yes.
with a lot of movie adaptations of things because sometimes live action can be good, but then sometimes it just doesn't work. So hopefully it's going to be decent.
I think this one will probably be better than worse.
Yeah.
Because Amulet, while it is a successful series, it's not a overly like successful series, kind of like a Sonic or a Mario or a Star Wars, My Little Pony. So I feel like the pressure to make this, because a lot of like pressure from making book adaptations or video game adaptations into movies kind of feel rushed and pressured a ton. Of course, you have success stories along the way. I feel like the lesser named ones kind of have a advantage at to a level just because
Mm.
they're lesser known, and the pressure by higher ups in the company to get the thing out probably isn't there as much.
Yeah, I would definitely agree on that. It does tend to be the less known ones that end up almost having the better adaptions sometimes, just probably because of the lack of like extreme pressure to get it right or get it done quickly.
I think one cool art style that they could actually do with this movie. I don't know what the Coraline, or there's another one that was
Yeah.
done by that same people. It was with an Eastern Asian girl with like with a monkey and like a cockroach. And I
Yeah,
think
that
that could be a
was
cool style
yeah,
to
Kubo
do
and the
with
Two Strings.
Amulet, since it emulates kind of like this different steampunk type vibe world. In some ways, it's very soft in terms on the world building skill. For those not really sure what I'm talking about, soft is more like Studio Ghibli, kind of like whimsical, kind of like things are out of nowhere, but they are believable, while harder world building is more like Tolkien. Rules are set, everything has an explanation.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree that in the kind of stop motion style, like in Coraline, that would work really well because I love that style. I would love to see that.
But hopefully that movie will be successful. And if you are looking for this book series, it is done by Scholastic. And if you just go somewhere on Amazon or another book site, it is probably going to be one of the easier furry medias that we talk about that will be probably be easier to access. This because it is popular in the graphic novel industry, and it does get a lot of sales, or it has been quite successful. So, and it's quite new. Some of the others I'm going to mention here or have mentioned are a bit older. But yeah, that's Amulet. So, Uno, what's the next one on your list?
So mine kind of flows quite well from that because mine is also not really a strictly furry based thing, but it definitely has some kind of furry-ish elements to it. And that is the Tank Girl series. There's comics I think the comics are still going. They've been going since the 90s. And there's also a movie, so I'm going to kind of touch on both. But basically, the storyline is it's kind of set in post-apocalyptic Australia, I think, or at least the comics are in Australia. I think the film's a bit more American, I think. But it basically follows the sort of adventures of Tank Girl. She's like this sort of post-apocalyptic character. And in the storyline, she has a boyfriend who is an anthropomorphic kangaroo. And in the film series, and I think in some of the earlier comics, there are also more kangaroos. There's kind of like a race of these anthropomorphic, half human, half kangaroo characters.
Interesting.
Um, but, but I mean, I love both the movie and the comics. They're quite different to each other. But I remember as a kid, like I'd always look at the comics. Every time we go to the comic store, I'd always look at them because the trouble with the comics is they're not really kid friendly in a way. I mean, they're not like there's nothing extreme or anything, but they're not meant for kids. So I never got them until I was kind of probably like 19 or so. But I would always look at them because the artwork was done by Jamie Hewlett, who is one of my favorite artists. And I would always like, I'd just look through the comics and I always would kind of focus on this one kangaroo character just because he was like a furry character. Booger, he's called. And he was my favorite character. And then obviously when I got a bit older, I got into the comics and I saw the movie quite a long time ago. And in the movie, the kangaroos are kind of done with prosthetics. So there's like a group of them. I can't remember how many, there's quite a lot of them. But the costumes are sort of done with these like sort of prosthetics. So they do look kind of furry, but they also look kind of creepy in a way. But they're really well done. I always really liked how they looked, even though they look pretty weird. And the comics as well, like especially in the recent comics, the character Booger has a much more furry kind of look. He's a lot more cartoonish looking. So I really think like it would probably appeal to a lot of furries. I mean, he always appealed to me as a character when I was a kid and still now. And I mean, I like the comics anyway, just because I find them entertaining. But it's just interesting how like something that isn't furry related kind of has furry characters in it as well. I always think that's quite cool when they're sort of incorporated into the same world as like the human characters. But yeah, just the art style and the kind of humor in it is just brilliant. And if you like anything a bit weird and surreal, I definitely think it's worth checking out.
Yeah, just taking a look at it a few nights ago, it is definitely something I want to check out. It's really interesting because there's very few things out there that are quote or that are considered diesel punk,
Yeah.
which is for those who are not familiar with diesel punk, it's essentially steampunk, but it's in the style of 1920s to post World War II type technology. So it's kind of like that era of like Grease, Tommy guns, you name it, from the 20s, 30s, and 40s. So I found that to be really cool.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just a series that I just find really interesting. Already, just looking on the outside, I've not seen or read anything from it. But as you mentioned, I think it's cool to see animal characters be side by side with human characters, and it definitely worked. I mean, when we had Guardians of the Galaxy come out as a movie, I thought that Rocket was one of the best things to come from the Guardians, and that and this overall those movies were just fantastic. But it's really cool to see kind of like a blend of like these anthropomorphic characters alongside humans, and if done correctly, it's just super cool. And I'm a little bit surprised that this isn't as well known as it is, at least here in the United States, or
Yeah.
maybe I am living under a rock. Who knows? I've been known to do that a few times. So, yeah, it just sounds like something I really want to check out.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. The combination of humans and furry characters can work really well when it's done really well. I think the comics originally are British. I think. Don't quote me on that because it could be wrong. But I know the comics were very popular over here for quite some time, but that was a very long time ago, probably before I was even in existence. But especially in the movie as well, because the movie is very underrated. It's quite different to the comics. The story is slightly different. But I always just really liked how the kangaroos are these kind of like really weird looking sort of prosthetic like special effects kangaroo human hybrid things alongside the humans, but they kind of work as a team and like no one really cares that they're like these like weird looking kangaroos. They're just like other people in a way. But they're also like because obviously the villains in the film are kind of out to get them. They sort of treat them as like villains in a way, which is kind of to go on to a slightly different topic. It kind of ties into like being an outcast and which I think, especially me as a kid, I could relate to that a lot. Like Booger was almost like he was always my favorite character because I could kind of relate to that, being a weird kid and stuff. So yeah, I just really liked him as a character, and I liked the other kangaroos, and I think a lot of people would enjoy that. Yeah, so that's Tank Girl if you want to check it out. And what is your next choice?
So I'm going to be cheating here a little bit. So I'm going to be mentioning a ton of series, but I feel like they're not as deep as probably the other stuff we've talked about and before and after. And so I'm going to talk about the Hanna-Barbera classic cartoons. So these are the characters like Top Cat, Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound. I even think that Scooby Doo and Tom and Jerry would be considered to be classic Hanna-Barbera, although Scooby Doo and Tom and Jerry, I would say, are well more known than the rest of these Hanna-Barbera characters. But there's a ton of cartoons from, I believe, the 60s to 80s of Hanna-Barbera. Now, a ton of these shows didn't have really long, what you would call it, seasons, but there were a lot that were there that I would definitely recommend, and a lot of staple characters. I remember one of my favorite cartoons growing up as a child I would watch most days before going to school was wacky races, Dick Dastardly and Muttley, and I just like to think that they're kind of like this OG Waluigi and Duck Hunt dog from like. I just love the snickering from Muttley and the Stop the Pigeon, which is another show the two star in. It's just so fun to see Muttley be troublesome and evil-ish. Classic troll dog, but I really like a lot of these shows. I mean, I really love Scooby Doo, and we could do a whole episode on Scooby Doo. I grew up with this dog so much. I mean, my parents will probably talk about if how I would just never watch anything but Scooby Doo, and I remember one month in October, all they showed was Scooby Doo, and that's all I wanted to do. I took my marathon a little too seriously as a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, but the priorities of a 5-year-old wolf, oh no. But I would definitely check out these old cartoons. There are a lot of them are quite weird. I mean, you have some like the Bear Bunch gang that kind of like ride in a visible car of sorts. Top Cat's kind of like this mafia style type gang. There's like a cowboy horse. I can't remember his name, and it's frustrating me.
Was it Quick Draw McGraw?
Yes, Quick
Yes.
Draw. Thank you.
So.
And then I also really like one of my favorites was Secret Squirrel. I mean, there's just a bunch of these anthropomorphic cartoons I think people might turn out really liking. Now, the one precaution I would definitely say, though, is that these cartoons definitely have outdated themes, and some of the names of certain characters, such as Hong Kong Phooey and some others, can definitely raise some eyebrows. So, and I do remember watching a few Scooby-Doo and Tom and Jerry cartoons that had some questionable themes and moments. So, proceed with a little bit of caution. It is the 1970s, and people back then definitely didn't know what was good from bad at times. So, but overall, these cartoons, I would say the Yogi Bear, Snagglepuss, Quick Draw, Top Cat, Muttley, I would definitely check these guys out. They're staples for Hanna-Barbera and a lot of cartoons, and it's really cool to see where these characters are going. News came out quite recently that there's going to be a new Hanna-Barbera cartoon with a lot of these show characters like Wally Alligator, Yogi. I don't know exactly what the cartoon will be about, although it does look like one of those like parody type cartoons of reboots you've kind of seen here recently, kind of like Teen Titans Go is kind of what it kind of looks like. Very different art style. And then I know they're bringing back the older Hanna-Barbera cartoon characters like Muttley. I know that him and Dick Dastardly appeared in the latest Scooby-Doo movie. So that it's just cool to see old cartoon characters kind of get revived.
Yeah, because I grew up with Hanna-Barbera cartoons like equally as much as you, I think. And yeah, I totally agree. It's really good to see them kind of coming back. I mean, obviously when it's done right. Like recently as well, there was the new Tom and Jerry movie. I was actually lucky enough to see that at the cinema, which was I actually really enjoyed it, even though it's different to the old ones. But I'm glad that they didn't stray away from like the original Tom and Jerry kind of formula. Like it's still kind of really wacky, violent cartoons.
Oh yeah, no, I love Tom and Jerry so much.
Yeah, so I was just really happy that they stuck to that, even though it has some like live action elements and stuff. So it will be really interesting to see the new cartoons as well. And also with Scooby-Doo, like I grew up with Scooby-Doo as well. And I always kind of think, because I'm quite into horror now, and I always think that was kind of, as a kid, that was like the way into horror and stuff, because some of the movies especially were quite spooky.
Yeah, the Zombie Island one especially was spooky. I mean,
yeah,
people are dying on screen, turning into zombies and cat people. A little terrifying, but yeah, I know. I especially love Tom and Jerry. That was one I grew up a ton as a child, and we could talk about this all day, but I mean, I feel so bad for Tom. I mean, let me know if you sympathize with either Tom or Jerry, because I feel like we're the only two people on the planet who feel bad for Tom.
Yeah.
In most, I mean, there's occasionally times where Tom's clearly out of line, but He's just a cat trying to protect the house from a mouse. So,
Yeah,
um,
I always felt so bad for Tom as a kid. Like he
yes.
was my favorite. But yeah, all the others like Top Cat as well. I remember watching Top Cat a lot and Hong Kong Phooey, even though that's rather outdated now in terms of the name and stuff. But as a
Yes.
kid, you kind of don't really notice those things. And I remember watching that in like when I was very young, and it never really occurred to me that there could be anything wrong with
Yeah,
that.
I
But
mean,
yeah.
that's the yeah, going back and watching a couple of these, there's definitely times where like, oh, that was a thing.
Mm.
Uh-oh. I remember watching a old Scooby-Doo cartoon. It was I don't know what the episode but the episode name, but the episode was where they went to Chinatown and there was this one part where like definitely a very racist moment in the cartoon. I
Mm.
think
I think I remember that.
Shaggy imitates a Chinese man, but
Yeah.
since then, the I think Boomerang, where the episodes are being held right now, they censored that. I'm not
Yeah.
too sure though, but that's definitely something that hopefully doesn't reoccur in the upcoming cartoons. Probably won't now that people are
Yeah.
aware. But I mean, it's just really interesting to see kind of like the evolution of these cartoons.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Boomerang, especially now, do a really good job of just making sure that everything is appropriate.
Yes.
And especially with the new ones, I just like how, from what I've seen so far with the new Tom and Jerry movie and some of the newest Scooby-Doo movies, it's just that even though they're new and they're updated and some things are different, they aren't straying too far from the original cartoons that we
Yes.
remember. So that's really good to see.
So, with Hanna-Barbera mentioned, what would be next on your list?
So my next choice is a game, actually, and I think a lot of people will have heard of this, especially recently, as there's been a new one come out very recently, and that is Ratchet and Clank. So Ratchet and Clank is one of my all-time favorite game series. Like I love those games so much. But I remember getting the first one on the PlayStation 2 as a kid, and the PS2 was it was always my favorite console when I was very young. So I remember discovering this because I'd seen it like advertised on TV and I just thought it looked really cool. And then eventually got the game like secondhand because games were very expensive when you're a kid with just like 50p pocket money or whatever.
Yes.
But I remember getting the first one and I just absolutely loved it. Like it was unlike anything I'd played before. Like because I played a lot of Crash Bandicoot and Sonic and Rayman, which I absolutely love as well. But what was different about Ratchet and Clank was that it was like really kind of free roaming and just like had so many different weapons and like just the space vibe of it as well is really unique and just really different to any other game, to be honest. So basically, for anyone who doesn't know, Ratchet and Clank basically follows the story of Ratchet, who is a Lombax, which is a kind of made up alien species, but they're definitely a very furry character. I remember playing it for the first time and thinking that Ratchet was a cat because he just kind of looks like a cat.
Yeah, he kind of looks a little
Um,
bit like a fennec cat.
yeah, I
Best
remember
describe it.
thinking he was some kind of weird looking alien cat. But yeah, he's a Lombax. So he basically meets a small robot, which is called Clank. And then the two of them have these kind of adventures together. And there's loads of games now. I think there was three main ones on the PS2, and then there was Ratchet Gladiator, which was also on the PS2, and then I think there was one more on the PSP, I think, which I've never actually played. But I played all of the original ones and a couple of the PS3 ones. And then I think there's one or two on the PS4, and just recently there's one come out for the PS5, which I haven't played yet, but I would love to. But it's basically just these kind of really epic like space adventures, and you travel to so many different planets, and every planet kind of has its own feel to it. And you get different weapons, and each weapon kind of does something weird and unique. I remember one of my favorite ones was the Groovatron, which fires a disco ball and
Oh, interesting.
makes the enemies start dancing. So then it's a lot easier to defeat them. And I think there was one that turns the enemies into snowmen or something. I can't quite remember, but um, they're just really unique games and just really fun. Like the gameplay is just unlike anything else, and Just the space theme and just the vibe in general, and also the humor in it as well. Like they're really funny and the characters are really appealing. Ratchet especially is a really appealing character, and he is obviously a furry character. So I think if you haven't played these games and you want some other kind of furry-ish game to play, then I would definitely recommend checking them out.
Yeah, I mean, I got first introduced to Ratchet and Clank at a swim meet. Um, I don't know if it was my friend who is obsessed with ants, but he was I think it was him. He was playing Ratchet and Clank on the PSP, so the handheld
Yeah.
one. So that was my first exposure, and I'm a little upset that I ended up getting an Xbox. So I grew up with Nintendo, and I primarily play Nintendo, and I do have of an Xbox. But after kind of like seeing the Crash Bandicoots, the Ratchet and Clanks, and all the other PS games of furry characters, I'm like, I got the wrong console. So when the time comes around, I because I am gonna eventually get the PS5. I'm just done with Xbox. Nothing wrong with Xbox. Just cooler games on PlayStation. Sorry. Not trying to cause controversy.
Yeah.
Controversy. Oh no, but yeah, it's definitely a game when I do eventually get the PlayStation, whenever that will be. It will probably be a few years, unfortunately. It's definitely a game I do want to try because Ratchet and Clank, the new one especially, looks gorgeous.
It looks amazing,
I
yeah.
mean, this watching the TV ads and some of the gameplay, it just looks like a gorgeous game, and I just love the cyberpunk element to furries and that the space element as well. It's really cool, and I really do like the design of the Lombax. This like cat fennec creature. It's just super cool and super adorable too. I think. And now I do remember they made a movie a few years ago, although
Yeah, I forgot about that.
if you look, I think it didn't get the best reviews, but it
I
is.
have seen it actually.
Oh, how is it? I've never seen it.
I'd forgotten about it, which kind of says a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it, and it's it's definitely not bad, but it just didn't have the same feel as the games. I thought. I mean, the animation and the art style was really nice. Like it looked really nice, and there's nothing wrong with the storyline or anything. But I think they were just kind of taking it in the wrong direction in a way. Like it felt like a kind of like a random kids movie.
Yeah.
And like if that's what it was, if it was just a random kids movie, it probably would have been decent. But the fact that it was based on a game that a lot of people really love and like that had already been going for quite a few years, I think it just didn't have the same vibe. Like I wouldn't say anything negative really about it, but it just didn't have the same feel. I thought. I'm not too sure what anyone else thinks of it. Like if any of the listeners have seen it and you want to share your opinions, I'd be quite interested to hear what other people thought. But I definitely thought that it was a decent film. It was a nice art style. The story was fine, but it just didn't have the same atmosphere that I remember from the games, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it is a game I really want to try, and the unfortunate thing is I can't. I mean, yes, I could theoretically go and spend 500 some. I don't think PS5 is five. Well, with Ratchet and Clank, it would probably sum up to $500. I'd have to get a controller too. So, but.
Yeah.
Maybe when the prices drop and
Yeah.
I am not moving around so much as I am at the moment, maybe I will. I do want to try this eventually. It does look gorgeous. If you are deciding between the PlayStation or Xbox, PlayStation has more furry options. So
Yeah, as a kid, I mean, I got my PS2 when I was 7, I think. And I still have it. I still play it sometimes just to chill out and stuff. But I chose the PlayStation purely because it had more games with animals. That was before I knew I was a furry, but should have been obvious. But I definitely remember choosing that because it had Sonic, Crash, Rayman, Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper, all the furry games were on PlayStation. and that's what I wanted. So yeah. Yeah, so that's Ratchet and Clank. Very, very good game series if you want to check that out. So moving on now, what is your next piece of furry media?
So I'm going to do a video game as well, and if you follow me on Instagram or talk to me quite frequently, you probably will kind of guess this was gonna come at some time. It's Toontown. Toontown Rewritten, Toontown Corporate Clash. So it is a computer game that is free. I cannot stress that enough. Toontown Rewritten and Corporate Clash are free games. They used to be so Toontown used to be a online game from Disney, and the story is that you create this like colorful furry animal and you fight capitalistic robots trying to take over Toontown and make it into a monopoly business. So if you like animals fighting capitalist robots, I would definitely recommend the game. Came out in I believe 2003, although they started making it in the late 90s. It lasted about 10 years with Disney until they decided to close it. And in a desperate attempt to keep Toontown alive, a group of really supportive fans decided to take the code and recreate the game called Toontown Rewritten. So it is very much the same game with a couple of changes and additions. And there's a new one called Corporate Clash if you are wanting to play something a little bit more difficult. But Toontown is pretty much a turn-based game where you throw gags, which are kind of like pies, bombs, water hoses, foghorns at the cogs, and then they kind of like come back with you with their cog attacks like water coolers, golf clubs, red tape, taxes, you name it. And each of the cogs have like these like pun parody cogs. Like you have like the micromanager, which is like this tiny little cog, a loan shark, which is like a shark cog. But it's a really cool game, and the one thing I really like about this game, and I would definitely recommend to people I would definitely recommend, is it's a really relaxing game. It is a very, compared to some of the other games, it's quite easy to play if everyone knows what you're doing. It's essentially a math game. You have tasks, you have to get HP and better gags through experience and tasks, but it's a very straightforward game and it's really fun to display, and it doesn't require a ton of brain power to play. So you can do something else, listen to something, watch something while playing it, and it's just a really relaxing game. And it is a game where you get to play and create an animal. And I would definitely say the game definitely greatly led to me becoming a furry. And I mean, a lot of my characters that I draw originally were Toontown characters. Truffles, Fluffendorf, Jesse, Maniac, Corso, all came from Toontown, and it's just super cool that you can just create an animal avatar and fight robots that are capitalists. It's quite ironic that the game came from Disney, which is a very business-based company. So the fact that they were kind of poking fun, or allowed developers to kind of poke fun at themselves as these robots, it's just a cool game. But if you have a computer, I would definitely recommend downloading Toontown Rewritten and giving it a try. It's free, and I hope that it turns out to be a fun game for you.
Yeah, I mean I only know really about Toontown through you. I mean I remember when it was owned by Disney, I remember seeing like an advert on TV as a very young kid, but I never actually played it. And obviously now it's not run by Disney anymore. But I really need to check it out because, like what you were saying, it's free, so I really have no reason not to. But it does look like a really fun game, and just the fact that you get to like create an animal character is like almost like creating a persona. So
Yes, very much
that's
so.
like a really really good feature to have. So yeah, I really don't know that much about it other than what you've told me, but I do want to check it out. So Hopefully,
I
some of the listeners will also want to check it out too.
I want to make a new tune sometime in the future. I mean, I'm thinking about creating a green bear. I think that's what I'm gonna make for my next tune. But I mean, when you get the game, let me know because I would be more than happy to make that new tune and play with you.
Yeah,
And if
definitely.
anything troublesome comes along, I mean, I can
Yeah,
just hop on
I
Truffle,
will.
who's my blue bunny, and he's almost done with the main storyline. I mean, I have to like go through like the cash bot, which are like the money bots, dungeons called the mints, and the tasks at the end. It's you have to like go through these dungeons a lot, and I mean it's relaxing, it's fun. Although occasionally, for experienced players, it can still provide quite a challenge.
Yeah.
Because we did lose a player through a disconnection, and that was actually
Oh
a lot of
no.
fun. It was like how far can we go? And Truffles like walked out with a black eye, but we made it barely.
Yeah.
I mean, we were limping out the, with golf balls in our eyes and chompers on our legs, but I mean, we did it. But I would, yeah, I can't. I mean, I'm a little fanboying a little bit. It's just a fun game. Check it out.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to check it out, and I'm sure that has definitely. I was going to say sold it to the listeners, but then I remembered it. You don't even need to buy it, so I'm sure that's convinced a lot of people to check it out.
Yes, and I mean, it's a super old game, so don't really worry about your computer not being powerful enough. This game did come out in 2003, so fingers. Hopefully, most computers can handle it. I'm not
Yeah,
the tech expert, so don't come after me if
well
I.
that'll be the test of mine because my computer can't handle a lot. So if it can handle it, then we know it's fine.
Yes, we will see here very soon, I guess. Well, that was Toontown, and moving on, what is your next piece of furry media?
So this is another PlayStation game. I mentioned it very briefly when I was talking about Ratchet and Clank. And this is Sly Cooper, or Sly Raccoon, as it was known for, I think, the first game. So yeah, this is another PlayStation game. Came out on the PS2. I don't know exactly when, sometime in the early 2000s, I think. But there's four games altogether. There's Sly Raccoon, then there's Sly 2, Sly 3, and 4. And number 4 was on the PS3, and the others were on the PS2. So the Sly Cooper games basically follow the adventures of Sly, who is a raccoon, and his two friends, Bentley and Murray, who are a tortoise, I think, or a turtle, and a hippo. And they're like this group of thieves. So the idea is that they kind of do these like really extreme heists to kind of steal things and break into buildings and stuff. So you play as Sly mostly, but then I think it's just from the second game onwards you do also play as the other characters, and each character has their own kind of abilities. So Sly is really sneaky. Bentley has like lots of gadgets and things, and Murray is the really kind of strong one. So they all have like different missions. It's just a really really fun game, and it's just really unique to play as a thief in a way, because you're kind of running around stealing things, and like that's not I don't think that's very common in games. Like you're normally some kind of a hero, but in this you're like a thief.
Yes, you could be bad.
Yeah, but I remember, I think it's the second one. One of my favorite missions is when you actually have to break into a nightclub, and you just kind of break into this club. I think it's like a nightclub in Paris that's owned by this iguana. And you break in and just start like breaking everything and stealing things and collecting loads of coins and stuff. And there's also, I remember certain parts, I think this is in every one of the games, where you can like pickpocket the villains. So Sly, who's obviously the main character, he has this cane that's like a hook on the end. So he uses his kind of hook on the cane to just pickpocket. But it's just like so suspenseful because you're kind of sneaking around behind this villain who could just turn around any second. And then there's parts where you've got to avoid like lasers, and it's quite a sort of dark atmosphere because it's sort of nighttime, like sneaky sort of crime based game. But it's just incredibly fun, and like you'll never get bored playing them because there's so many different missions and so many different like characters to play as, and everyone does a different mission and different themes and stuff. And similarly to what you were saying about Toontown as well, like it's kind of a game I used to play a lot to just kind of chill out, because if you don't want to do the missions, you can just sneak around and sort of collect the coins and stuff. Because I think more so in the later ones, maybe the third and fourth, I think there's kind of a feature where you collect coins and then you can use those to buy things. So it's kind of, you kind of have the option of doing the missions or just sort of exploring and collecting coins and stealing things. And sometimes you'll find like hidden areas and stuff. But they were just brilliant, and like all the characters are furry characters. So there's the three main ones, and then the villains are also furry characters. So I remember Dimitri is the iguana, and then there was a tiger character. I can't remember his name now, but he was one of my favorite villains as well. I think there was a bird villain and a frog. There were so many different villains, like I can't remember off the top of my head, but they're all sort of furry based characters, and the whole thing is anthropomorphic, and just the art style and the dark atmosphere is just brilliant. I would definitely recommend.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of one of the games. I think Sly was in Tibet or Nepal in the
Yeah.
mission. And it seems like a really cool game. Again, it makes me mad that I have an Xbox and not a PlayStation because I do want to check these games out soon. But yeah, no, it sounds like a really fascinating game, just given that you get to steal things. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, you get like mini games. You get tons of games out there. It's like, oh, be the good guy. I mean, do the right thing. And I mean, do the right thing, guys. I'm not advocating mischief.
Yeah.
In
In
the
games though, it's fine.
stay out of trouble.
This is why you have these games, so you don't need to do it in real life.
If you get in trouble, don't come to Felix and be like, he told me to, so don't. But it's fun that you get to be a mischievous raccoon and be troublesome. It's always fun when you play occasionally the morally ambiguous characters.
Yeah.
They're fresh, and they typically are more realistic characters
Yeah.
in terms of they feel more human.
Yeah.
Um, just given, I mean, there's tons of video games out there where you have hero characters, but they just feel very much, I wouldn't say flat, but very typical.
Mm.
While characters like Sly sounds like they definitely a lot more complex, uh,
Yeah.
motivated. So
Yeah, well, definitely that ties into one of the things I always loved about the series, even as a kid, like just the characters just seem to have so much more personality than, I mean, there's plenty of games out there where the
oh
characters
yeah,
have
definitely.
tons of personality, but they just it kind of felt like a movie rather than a game sometimes, just because of how elaborate the stories were and like how much personality the characters have. And I think that in at one point, I think there was actually a movie in production, but I don't think it ever got finished. I think it was cancelled.
Yeah,
Um,
I think I heard
but
about that.
yeah, I remember seeing a trailer very long time ago, years ago, and it just I don't think it went any further. But it's kind of a
It's quite
shame. But then
unfortunate. Yeah.
yeah, but then at the same time, I mean, thinking about it, it sometimes they are better off just as the game. Like similarly to what I was saying about Ratchet and Clank with the movie. The movie wasn't bad, but it just didn't have the kind of charm that the games had. So I mean, maybe the same thing would have happened with Sly, or maybe it would have turned out to be really good, but I don't think we'll ever know now, unfortunately.
Yeah, but Sly Cooper does sound like an interesting game. Our last one, we actually both had this on our list, so we've decided to merge it as kind of like our last. And it is another video game, and we did mention him a little bit earlier, but it's Crash Bandicoot. I remember for me, I Crash Bandicoot was maybe the second ever video game I was exposed to as a young child. Definitely one of the very first games I played independently as a child. I remember getting the Game Boy games of Crash, and I think there was one on the GameCube, a racing game. I think it was Crash Bash. I think no, that's the party game.
Was
Um,
it Nitro Kart?
Nitro Kart, I believe.
Yeah.
But Crash Bandicoot is for a video game series. I absolutely love it. Absolutely love the characters. Crash is just adorable, especially the modern version of Crash. I mean, I think they've done a great job with
Yeah.
renditioning Crash, and it's just really cool to see this character kind of come back from the dead and be quite successful.
Yeah, because I mean, Crash is a huge one for me. Like, Crash was my, well, he is my, I would say he is my all-time favorite character from anything. But yeah, I think it was the first video game I was properly exposed to as a kid. I remember a friend of mine having it before I had any consoles, but it was one of the first games I got when I got my PS2. So I played all the PS1 and PS2 Crash games, played every single one of those as a kid. I absolutely loved them all. And honestly, I could just talk forever about why I love Crash so much. But just like, I mean, Crash himself as a character is just absolutely adorable, like you were saying, and he's just like such a great character. But one thing that I always really loved was like just the world behind it, because it's this such like strange mixture of like aesthetics in a way. So you've got the kind
Yes.
of like you have the kind of wacky cartoony look of Crash, and then you've got like the sort of tropical tiki island aesthetic mixed with like this really sort of sinister technology with the villains and stuff.
Mhm.
And so you've got kind of like a tropical island with like a creepy castle like plunked on top of it. And it just works so well somehow. And I mean, for me as well, like this is kind of weird, but as a kid, like we always had a lot of like kind of tiki stuff in the house. We had a lot of masks and stuff. We still do. So I kind of grew up around that sort of aesthetic. And I think in a way, as a kid being into Crash as well, it sort of linked to something I knew from home in a way.
Mhm.
So I always kind of connected to sort of the tiki
Oh,
aesthetic, but
that's
I
cool.
also really liked the kind of like the villains and just the sort of sinister parts of it
Oh yes,
and the cartoony parts too.
yeah, the villains are I really like the villains. I mean, I think just growing up, I mean, I the ones I was exposed to was Neocortex. I knew Tiny Tiger, which is just adorable Tasmanian tiger, big buff. Klutz, Engine a little bit, but the two I knew a lot was Entrance, which kind of really came from only the Game Boy games.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, which is kind of like this pink blob, and then in Trophy, I
Yeah.
don't, and then a little bit of Dingo Dial. I thought Dingo Dial was a hog, um,
Yeah.
because I was only introduced to him on the Game Boy version of the Crash games I've played. But no, it's really cool. I mean, Crash for me, I mean, I would definitely rank him up there as definitely one of my favorite all-time furry characters. He definitely was one of the first ever video games I was exposed to, and I have a lot of closeness to Crash with that. This especially, a lot of times I would play Crash. I was with my grandparents, so I kind of like associate them and the city of Atlanta a little bit with Crash
Mm.
Bandicoot. Although there's nothing similar between Atlanta and Crash.
Yeah.
No, it'd be cool if they did have Crash in Atlanta. But I mean, and I just really like how both of us like Crash Bandicoot because I will be. I don't know if I've talked about this with you, but that's how I ran into you when I first met you
I did
on
not know
Artspace.
that.
So I so it was one. I think it was the one where you drew all of the villains, and it was a really old one. I think it was 2016, I believe.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
But I've loved that art style. Still do absolutely love your unique art style.
Thank you.
But the art style stood out to me, and I was kind of getting into a Crash revival like hypeness because the remakes were coming out.
Yeah.
So I was looking at Crash art, and I ran across yours, and that's how I got to know you, or first got introduced to you.
I actually never knew that. That's actually really cool. Yeah, I remember drawing that piece as well because that got quite a lot of attention because I've just always loved the Crash villains, like I mentioned. Because I mean, as a kid, I used to draw the villains. I was actually sorting through a load of old art the other day, and there's a lot of old, very old drawings of Crash villains. I remember I used to draw Neocortex and Nina Cortex a lot. Just I don't know why. I think as a kid I just found them the easiest to draw. But all of the villains I absolutely love, and I love the main characters like Crash and Coco.
Yes.
Well, all of the characters.
Yes, all of the
But
characters.
yeah, all of them.
Now, if you had to pick, what would be your favorite of the villains?
That is an incredibly difficult question. If I'm gonna pick a couple, I want to say Dingodile. I kind of want to say Nina Cortex and Tiny Tiger if I can add a third to
Yeah,
that.
I
That's
love
three.
Yeah, I would
I can't
probably
pick
say,
one.
yeah. I mean, I can't really pick one either. I mean, I'll cheat here a little. I mean, for me, it's between Tiny or Ripperoo. I absolutely love that.
Oh, I forgot about
Game.
Ripperoo. I love Ripperoo.
The blue kangaroo and a straight.
Yeah,
I just absolutely love that
I
concept.
would have to add him to my favorites as well.
Yeah, but no, it's just a video game series that I absolutely loved as a child. I got the remake of the Crash Racing game, so on the Nintendo Switch. So I'm gonna play that very soon when I finish Subnautica. Um, so
It's
I'm
very good.
I'm very
I also
excited
have it on the
to.
Switch.
I've never played the original to Crash Racing games,
Yeah,
other than the Game Boy version.
yeah.
And I did play the GameCube one where it had like Pasadena, Possum,
Oh yeah.
the peach orange guy that gets squished at the end. Spoilers.
Willy Wumper cheeks.
Apologies. um, so that was just a weird game because
Yeah,
I just remember my cousin got it for Christmas one year, and during the loading screen you could like press buttons and like Crash would fart.
yeah. I remember that.
And I just remember as like young children we would absolutely love doing that, and I mean it drove our parents nuts. I mean I think they were happy the day they did not have to hear the crash
Yeah.
cards anymore. It's just a fun childish game. I love it still today. I mean, I need to replay it at some point.
Yeah, I
Before I
still
go
love
back
that
to
game.
Florida.
Like it's just so good. Like I remember that particular one. I think it was tag team racing. I
Yeah,
think
tag team
that
race.
was the one, yeah. I liked how that kind of had like it had the racing, but then it also had that like adventure, like platformer
Yeah,
section to it.
I
I
like
thought
that.
that was really cool because not many racing games really have that as well.
I don't think there's any others that
Yeah, I always loved
like that.
that. I thought that was really because I remember playing that as a kid, and I used to play it with my dad. So like we'd play on like the multiplayer races,
Mhm.
and I didn't know for like a year that there was a whole like platforming section in it. And I remember finding that and being like, wow, like I was just so excited. But yeah, I love that game. I love all of the Crash games, honestly. Even the ones that people say are bad, I still enjoy.
I mean, Crash Bandicoot is Crash Bandicoot. I mean, you can't go wrong with
Yeah.
Bandicoot. Unfortunately, I've heard that it sounds like they're going to discontinue Crash for the time, because the Activision, I believe, is the ones currently working on the Crash games. I think
Yeah.
they are pulling their full attention to the Call of Duty games to
Yeah.
kind of counter Battlefield 2042, which I think is
Yeah.
coming out later this year, which is quite unfortunate because I mean I would
Yeah.
definitely say the Crash games are much more memorable than
Mm.
most of the shooters. But I mean that is coming from furry bias. So
Yeah.
um, this
Yeah, I think it was good though that we did get a remake because I mean I remember when the remakes were coming out. I think they were already out at the time, but I remember just going into Asda, which is basically the UK version of like Walmart, and they actually had like Crash Bandicoot t-shirts, and I just remember thinking like that's just crazy that I could just go somewhere like so local and they would have something like that, like because I remember as a kid it was so hard to find any merchandise. And I just remember thinking like that's really cool that Crash is kind of like popular now.
Yeah, I mean it's great that Crash has come back because I mean I was very much disappointed that Crash was being discontinued when it first happened. And
Yeah,
then I was super excited that Crash got not only got remakes but actually got a brand new game for the PlayStation and I think Nintendo Switch. So I mean when I get that PlayStation, I got a lot of catching up to do. So um,
Yeah,
something to look forward to in the future.
definitely. Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah,
I got my game agenda to
yeah.
do.
All booked up on that one.
To be, yes, booked up.
Yeah,
So, but yeah, Crash Bandicoot, absolutely love him.
yeah,
If you, he's probably one of the more known ones on this
yeah,
list, but I mean, I still think he is so underrated compared to some
yeah,
of the other furry video game characters.
yeah. Definitely. I definitely think if there's anyone out there listening who hasn't played the Crash games and who's interested in checking them out, I would definitely say go for it because you won't regret it. They're just so good.
Yeah, but that is all of our furry media stuff that we wanted to mention. Thank you for tuning in and listening to us talk about what we really love growing up and this the underrated furry content. And if you like this type of episode, please let us know. And if you wanted to hear more, maybe about a specific furry topic like Crash Bandicoot, Tank Girls, Toontown Rewritten, or and so forth, let us know, and we could definitely do an episode each on each of these if enough people are interested in it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about. Like, I mean, listening, you could probably tell there was just so much we could say about all of these and about so many other things. So, yeah, if you'd like to hear an episode about something specific, please do let us know, and we can definitely look into doing that. Or even if you'd like to hear another episode on underrated furry media in general, because I know for me personally, I had a lot of options that didn't quite make it onto the
Yes, same
episode
here.
that were in my head. So if anybody wanted to hear another episode like this, we could probably definitely do that in future.
Mhm.
I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Yes, definitely. But until the next episode, thank you everyone and stay fluffy.
Thank you all for tuning in. We hope to see you all next time.